First of all, I also want to thank Sasha and everyone involved for organizing this beautiful conference. As you can see, my talk will focus on the anthropomorphisation in Iron Age funerary context, which is also the topic of my dissertation project. In the first part, I will present you some data and material. The second part will deal with the interpretation of anthropomorphisation based on some case studies. The term anthropomorphisation is commonly known for describing the humanization of non-humans, for example, animals or gods that are attributed human characteristics or a human appearance. The Etruscan archaeologist Helle Darmgard Andersen uses the term to describe the increased occurrence of anthropomorphic representations that can be noted in the first millennium BC all over Central Europe, mainly in burial contexts. It was not until then that human-shaped art appeared regularly and in remarkable diversity. As illustrated here by more or less randomly picked examples, they are large-scale or small ceramic and bronze figurines, freestanding or as an application on vessels or fibulas, insisted decorations, and urns that are made up to look human. In fact, the anthropomorphization of urns, which is also the main topic of my PhD, is a quite common aspect of Iron Age burials on both sides of the Alps. I will focus on these special finds in my talk. I'm starting with a short summary. Most of you are probably familiar with face urns. They appear in the region of Chiusi in central Italy between the 7th and 5th century BC. The Italian finds are called canopi because they resemble the Egyptian canopic jars in which the organs of the deceased were stored. Well known are also the slightly younger face urns from Poland. In addition, Jutta Kneissl shed light on the representation of faces, or at least eyes and noses, on urns from Scandinavia and northern Germany, dating at least back to the 10th century BC. However, this is not the only possible anthropogenic feature by far. Other body parts like arms, hands, and breasts appear on urns too. Moreover, it is more than likely that urns were dressed with textiles and jewelry to give them a human appearance. In many burials of the first millennium BC, unburned textile fragments or other indications on textiles like imprints or a blackish organic layer have been found on the outside or in the immediate vicinity of urns, together with jewelry and clothing accessories, which are sometimes located in a functional position. For example, fibulas and pins on the urn shoulders, necklaces around the neck, or earrings on each side at the height of the lid. On this slide, you can see a feature with two urns, which can be considered as dressed due to the objects that were documented on or next to them. The urn in the right part of the picture was only equipped with a pin at belly height, whereas at the left you can see an urn on which textile fragments were found mixed with bronze and amber appliques. Further textile fragments were found on a pin which was placed on the urn body together with two other pins, as well as an arm ring. Next to the urn were two rings and a fibula and a neck ring. It is a burial from Domoslav in Poland, where many dressed urns can be documented. Another impressive example of a dressed urn comes from Liebersee in central Germany. 3 pins and 2 rings, which were spread on the urn shoulder, indicate the dressing. However, it is worth mentioning that the urn also has 3 knobs, which are interpreted as ears and a nose. So the Liebersee urn builds a bridge to the Polish face urns, which you can see on the right side. They have a more detailed face representation with carved eyes and modeled noses and ears. But apart from earrings, there are usually no jewelry objects to be found outside of the urns. However, a really special attribute of the Polish face urns are jewelry objects that were carved in their bodies. Mostly these are pins on the neck or shoulder and extensive necklaces, and the objects look exactly like metal objects found in the graves, as you can see on the picture on the bottom. In my opinion, it is obvious that to interpret these decorations as a, so to say, pictorial dressing of the urns. One might argue that the different anthropomorphic urns don't resemble each other in appearance and are therefore not comparable. That might be true if you focus on the urn as an object, but like others before me, I place practices at the center. It is not so much about their appearance, but that they were treated like human beings or a human body. This is underlined by urns which were placed on seating furniture, as in Grave 5 of Imola Ponte Santo, Italy. The well-documented burial revealed wooden fragments and brass studs under the urn, which was equipped with at least 22 fibulas. In the reconstruction you see on the left, it almost looks like as if the dressed urn has made itself comfortable on its chair to enjoy the food provided on the table. Further examples of the urn being treated as a human body are documented in Tarquinia, also Italy. There, urns were dressed with helmets and necklaces and laid horizontally in the burial pit, surrounded by the grave goods. The cremations are therefore lookalikes of inhumation graves. Urn dressing was up till now mostly a topic in studies south of the Alps, but investigating late Bronze Age and Iron Age burials between the Baltic Sea and the Apennines, which I did in my PhD, has shown that it was an integral part of funerary rituals across Central Europe. Apart from Italy, core regions for dressed urns are the area of the Lusacian culture in the early Iron Age, as well as the area of the Polish face urns in the later Iron Age, where the pictorial dressing with carved jewelry object is a characteristic feature. I therefore propose that the anthropomorphization of urns can be interpreted in a similar way like the fragmentation, manipulation, or wrapping of grave goods, and thus points to a widespread network of contacts in the late Bronze and early Iron Age. But of course, the question arises why there are anthropomorphic urns, and this brings me to the second part of my talk. In the Italian studies, anthropomorphic urns are interpreted as a kind of privilege of persons who represent their social position in funerary contexts. Those buried in them are associated with a high social position in a hierarchically organized society. One argument given in favor for this is the fact that dressed urns were documented in graves considered the most outstanding burials of the Iron Age of northern Italy, due to the quality and quantity of objects found. These pictures illustrate the most famous of these burials dating between the late 8th and 3rd century BC. A dressed urn was found in La Tomba del Drona from Verrucchio, in La Tomba dei Vasi Borgiati from Padua, and in La Tomba del Nerca from Este. And as you can see in the reconstruction below left, it is believed that the dressed urn was in the famous Benvenuti Situla. Another argument for the interpretation as a prestige object refers to the observation that not all deceased of a community were buried in an anthropomorphic urn. While working on my PhD, I realized how difficult it is to make empirical statements on the frequency of anthropomorphic urns per cemetery. Many circumstances affect the data. These include taphonomic processes and poor preservation conditions of organic material, the absence of important information to identify urn dressing, like the exact location and condition of jewelry and clothing accessories in the publications. It is problematic for statistical analysis that some cemeteries have not been fully excavated or published. And we have to deal with many old finds without any further information on the contexts, which is especially a problem for the face urns from Italy and Poland. However, it can be stated that dressed urns, for example, are much more common than previously thought. In the almost complete excavated early Iron Age cemetery from Domoslav, 180 burials with dressed urns can be documented out of 800 graves in total. That is about 20%. A case study from Italy provided a comparable result. 175 well-preserved burials from the Villa Brusci Falgari cemetery from Tarquinia were studied. Dressed urns were identified in 32 graves, representing about 18% of the burials. The study yielded some results which I would like to present briefly. The authors divided the dressed urns in 3 groups based on dress characteristics, some of which appear to be related to the sex of the deceased. First, there are 12 urns equipped with a necklace. In 9 of these, an anthropological male individual was buried, in 3 an anthropological woman. Second, there are 12 urns dressed with various jewelry and clothing accessories, such as small fibulas, as well as buttons, beads, and little rings, which were probably sewn on a decomposed textile. These urns appear to be associated with women, as an anthropologically female individual was buried in each. Last, 8 urns combining the first and the second characteristics, so necklaces and textile appliques. They can be assigned to 2 men and 6 women. The authors compare the burials with dressed urns, all except of the females of group 1, to the other graves of the case study. They observe that some features, which they describe as characteristics of a social distinction, can be documented much more frequently in the graves with dressed urns than in those without. I gathered the information of the study here in the table. The features mentioned by the authors are a lithic grave structure. It's a special construction you can see on the picture on the bottom right, which is found in female and male graves. Then helmets as urn covers. The helmet distinguishes the dressed urn as such, in my opinion, but you see that according to the authors, it's more a feature of social distinction, but it's only found in the male graves. Then an extensive set of ceramic vessels and diverse jewelry objects. Documented especially in female graves, however, ceramic sets are also, as shown in the picture below left, associated with urns with male individuals with helmets and necklaces. The conclusion of the study is that the dressed urns refer to the wealth and the high social role or rank of the deceased. That is why the one buried in them are counted among the elite of society. In the case of the Villa Bruci cemetery, the interpretation of the dressed urn is based on extensive analysis of the burial community. In contrast, dressed urns from other sites are often simply interpreted ad hoc as an indicator of wealth, a prestige object, or a status symbol of the elite without further arguments. Basically, it can be stated that the interpretation of anthropomorphic urns follows a pattern that is in many cases typical of prehistoric funerary archaeology. Burials with elaborate grave construction with many or high-quality grave goods, including objects that are regarded special because of their material or rarity, are considered rich. And since the elites of prehistoric communities are often thought of in economic terms, rich graves are regarded to be a material expression of them. This goes with the implicit understanding that, first of all, elites represented themselves or were represented distinctly in the context of funeral rituals compared to the other members of society. Second, that these practices were reflected in burial customs and left an archaeological record. And third, that we are able to recognize and read these distinctions today. Problematic here is not only the implicitness and uncertainty of these preconditions, but also that archaeological research usually lacks a definition of the supposed elite. Social sciences demand that the mechanisms of selection and the level of influence of the persons or social position associated with an elite need to be explained. An economic elite is not necessarily to be equated with a political elite or an elite defined by knowledge, for example. I therefore argue that anthropomorphisation should not per se become a marker of an elite. Also, because the first results of my study indicate that a more complex situation exists, which I will illustrate with 2 examples. In the cemetery of Castenaso Scolo-Medie in northern Italy, urn dressing could be documented in 15 out of 52 burials. The furnishings of the grave is very heterogeneous. The number of ceramic vessels varies from 0 to over 10. In some graves there are diverse and elaborately decorated jewelry objects, such as pins, fibulas, pendants, beads, and arm rings. In others, only a single metal object were found. Burials with many and diverse grave goods are counted by the authors as an indicator of the wealth of the families or individuals. Anthropomorphic urns can be found in all kinds of burials. The dressed urn in grave 31, for example, was equipped with three fribulas with amber and glass decorations and a few amber and glass beads, bronze studs, as well as fragments of different jewelry objects, likely arm rings. And the urn was buried with 14 vessels. Whereas the urn in grave 34 was found with a bronze fibula, a small bronze ring, a glass bead, a razor, and bronze fragments, but no vessel at all. In addition, there are cemeteries at which dressed urns are usually documented in the, average equipped burials. This can be observed, for example, in Niederkainas in central Germany. Apart from a few metal objects found inside and outside the urns, the furnishing of the graves consisted above all of ceramic vessels. Adults were provided with 14 to 22 vessels, in some cases with up to 40. An evaluation of the graves with dressed urns shows that the majority of them were buried with a similar number of ceramic vessels, that's 11 to 25, but no more than 33 vessels. Niederkaina is an interesting case because there are no burials that could be tagged as princely graves or Prunkgräber. On the contrary, there seems to be a very standardized funeral ritual with little room for an individual treatment. Jasmin Kaiser and Gabriele Manchus present a schematic burial sequence based on the rite de passage, into which they integrate the practices reconstructed for Niederkaina. For example, the public viewing of the dead, a canonical pattern of furnishing which consists of a mostly three-parted pottery set, the urn dressing, as well as post-funeral practices like grave manipulations. Despite some differences in the furnishings or the grave construction, the burials seem to follow this norm. This uniformity is interpreted as representing a collective identity of the burial community. With or after death, all members of the community acquire a new social role according to the authors. All of them become ancestors represented, among other things, by the dressed urns. Urn dressing could therefore be understood as a practice that serves to become an ancestor. This is interesting because it opens up a different approach aside from the interpretation as the prestige object and a marker of an elite. In principle, it must be considered that anthropomorphisation in funerary contexts may give us less information about the buried, but more about those who bury. Topics such as how prehistoric people cope with death and which practices for dealing with grief existed can be of significance here. To this end, I would like to embed the anthropomorphization of urns in models of cultural sciences and visual culture studies, in which the focal point is on death and the human approach to it. It seems obvious that the urns are directly linked to the funeral rituals of the Iron Age people of Central Europe. Without death, cremation, and burial, they would not exist. For the cultural scientist Thomas Macho, the corpse is one, if not the only, common feature for structuring and comparing the manifold burials and death rituals. The fact that the deceased living being does not simply disappear and that it changes through decomposition processes makes the corpse something material, according to Macho. The reaction of people to this serves him for classifying the rituals. He distinguishes between passive and active action. The latter he classifies according to whether the decomposition of the corpse is to be stopped or whether an attempt is made to either accelerate or prevent the decomposition. Whether they encompass deceleration or acceleration, the rituals ultimately lead to what he calls the representation of the deceased. Hans Belting explores the origin of image and image making and believes to have found it in the context of death and funerary rituals. Again, the corpse and the natural decomposition processes play a central role in his thesis. According to Belting, a human being becomes an effigy of himself through dying. For the corpse only resembles the deceased. He is only an image of them. To process this traumatic experience, the relatives create their own image of the deceased. Belting emphasizes that it's about becoming active in the face of death, as well as about creating a permanent embodiment of the deceased. In the form of his or her new image, the deceased was able to participate in society during the death rituals. In the sense of these models, the anthropomorphization of urns would thus be an active reaction of people to the experience of death. By burning the corpse, the relatives control and prevent the decomposition of the corpse and destroy the image of the deceased created by death. With an anthropomorphic urn, they create a new image that can exist as an imperishable shell and possibly continue to be part of society. Thanks for your attention.